The saloon had gone quiet, not because of gunfire or some outlaw storming through the doors, but because of something far more unusual in the West. A moment of raw, human stillness. Just minutes before, it was all laughter, clinking glasses, boots stomping to fiddle strings. Then she walked in, barefoot, trembling, her dress torn and body coated in dust from head to toe. No one knew where she came from. No one dared to ask. She stood in the doorway like a ghost left behind by the desert itself, and suddenly, every sound fell away. Men who had faced bandits, without blinking, now lowered their eyes. Women clutched their children closer. And yet, she didn't speak, didn't move. Her face was unreadable, blank, as if emotion had been drained from her completely. The only thing louder than her silence was the shame that began to ripple through the room. No one moved. Not until one cowboy, quiet, lean, warmed by sun and solitude, rose from the corner and stepped toward her. Dust clung to her like armor, but he didn't hesitate. He offered his hand. When he touched her shoulder and gently helped her stand upright, something shifted, not just in the girl, but in the room itself. Every pair of eyes locked on that moment. It was as if the entire saloon had been holding its breath, waiting for someone, anyone, to remember what decency looked like. And when he did, it shattered something. A few looked away. Some began to whisper. But most just watched because they knew they were witnessing something the West rarely showed. Mercy in motion. You see, the Old West wasn't just grit and gunpowder. It was built on silent codes, the kind spoken through glances and gestures, not words. And in that moment, when the cowboy helped the girl to her feet, he wasn't just offering her dignity. He was holding up a mirror to everyone else. What had happened to her? Who had let it happen? And what did it say about those who sat in comfort while she walked through dust alone? What followed wasn't a gunfight. It wasn't a brawl. It was something far more powerful, a reckoning. And as the girl stood, eyes still hollow but spine steady, the West itself seemed to pause. Because sometimes, the most thunderous moment isn't a shot fired. It's a hand extended, a silence broken, and a soul lifted from the dirt. This is the story of what came next. And it's one you won't forget. No one knew her name. And maybe that's why it hurt more. Because names give people shape, story, weight. But she came into that saloon like smoke from a dying fire. Slow, thin, barely there. Some thought she might be a runaway. Others a settler's child lost to the wilds. But there was something deeper in her silence. Something that warned everyone not to speak too soon. The cowboy, whose name was Eli, saw it first. Not her face, but the way her hands were clenched at her sides, knuckles white beneath the grime. That wasn't dirt from a trail. That was the kind that clings to a person when they've crawled out of something they were never meant to survive. Eli had seen many things out on the open range. He'd buried friends with no family, fought beside men who didn't know why they were fighting, and heard stories whispered around campfires that would haunt a man long after the flame died out. But he'd never seen a girl like this. Not in her condition, not in her stillness. And when he helped her to stand, she didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just breathed in like it was the first real breath she'd had in weeks. That, more than anything, told him what he needed to know. She'd been holding her breath through something terrible. The crowd watched. Some sipped their drinks awkwardly. Others looked away, as if her presence exposed something shameful in them. But one older woman approached with a shawl, laying it gently over the girl's shoulders. The girl didn't thank her. She couldn't. Her lips moved slightly, but no sound came. It didn't matter. In the West, words meant little. Actions carved the truth. And the truth was this. She didn't need to speak. Her body had already told the story. Eli asked for a room upstairs and carried her there himself, careful, steady, like she might disappear if he moved too fast. He wasn't a savior. He didn't have any grand ideas. He just knew no one else had stood up. And sometimes, that's all it takes. One man rising when others remain seated. Once inside, he helped her to the wash basin, poured warm water, and stepped back. She began to clean herself in silence, rubbing her arms like she was trying to erase more than just dust. And maybe she was. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in orange and ash, Eli sat by the window, staring out at a town that had gone still. Something was shifting, not just in the girl, but in everyone. The silence had said enough. Now, the West would have to answer for it. And the first page of that reckoning had been written the moment he helped her stand. By morning, word had spread like wildfire. Stories warped in the telling. Some said she was the daughter of a preacher gone missing. Others claimed she escaped from a wagon ambushed by bandits. But none of it came from her. She still hadn't spoken a single word. She ate little, drank only what was offered gently, and stared out the window like she was watching a past that hadn't let her go yet. Eli didn't press her. He just stayed close. Sometimes, presence says more than any question could. The sheriff came by around midday, not with suspicion, but with questions thinly veiled in concern. Eli answered what he could, which wasn't much. She came in covered in dust and silence, he said, and I helped her up. That's all I know. But the sheriff wasn't asking about facts. He was gauging reaction, wondering if this girl was trouble, or if trouble would come looking for her. The West had rules, but none were written. People just knew. And when someone broke those rules, it left cracks you could feel beneath your boots. That night, the girl finally spoke. One word. One name. Clara. Her voice was dry, brittle, like wind through broken glass. Eli didn't ask for more. He just nodded and said, "All right then, Clara. You're safe here." Her eyes flicked toward him for the first time, not fully trusting, but no longer guarded. It was a start, and in the Old West, that was as close to a promise as anyone ever got. Over the next few days, Clara began to piece herself back together. Not quickly, and not completely. But she walked on her own, ate at the table downstairs, and sat by the fire in the evening, wrapped in that same shawl. Townsfolk began to greet her, some with shame in their eyes, others with cautious kindness. The saloon grew quieter when she entered now, not out of pity, but respect. Something about her demanded it. But beneath it all, something darker stirred. Eli felt it like a storm building behind the hills. A past like Clara's doesn't vanish. It follows. And whatever she had walked away from hadn't stopped walking toward her. The silence before had been heavy. Now it was tense. Everyone could feel it. And the West, for all its dust and distance, was about to remind them that it never forgets. It was the fourth night when the horses grew restless. Eli heard them first, snorting, stomping, huffing at the darkness like something invisible was prowling just beyond the lantern's reach. He stepped out onto the porch with his rifle, not in anger, but readiness. In the West, danger rarely shouted. It crept. Clara stood behind the saloon window, watching. Her face remained calm, but her hands trembled slightly against the glass. She knew that feeling. She'd lived it. Whatever had dirted her skin that day in the saloon, it hadn't finished its business yet. By dawn, a rider was spotted on the ridge, black coat, wide hat, riding slow. Alone. But no one in town believed he was truly alone. In the West, a man like that didn't travel without shadows. The sheriff approached Eli quietly, voice low. "You think he's here for her?" Eli didn't blink. "I think whatever's behind her never let go." The sheriff sighed and adjusted his belt. "Well, you brought her here." Eli looked toward the mountains. "No, she walked here on her own. I just made sure she didn't fall." Later that afternoon, Clara sat on the steps outside the saloon, sun warming her face. A little boy ran up, handed her a small tin horse carved from scrap metal, then ran off again. She held it in her lap for a long time. Eli saw her from across the road. When he walked over, she didn't look up. She just said, "They used to call me girl, never by name. You call me Clara." He nodded once. "Because that's who you are." And for the first time, her lips curved slightly, not a full smile, but a piece of one. That evening, the rider entered town. Didn't speak, didn't ask, just tied his horse outside the stable and walked through the street like he was made of stone and revenge. People watched from behind curtains. The piano in the saloon stopped mid-note. He didn't even glance at anyone, just made his way to the sheriff's office and disappeared inside. But everyone knew why he'd come. Something about Clara had left a mark, not just on him, but on whoever sent him. Eli sharpened his knife by the fire that night, not because he planned to use it, but because it reminded him of who he used to be. There were things in his past he didn't talk about, choices, mistakes, roads he couldn't walk back down. But he had made peace with them. And now, someone else needed peace. Clara wasn't just a girl covered in dirt anymore. She was a line in the sand, and Eli knew the time was near when someone would try to cross it. The next morning, Clara wasn't at breakfast. Eli knocked once at her door, then again. No answer. He pushed it open gently and found the bed untouched. The window slightly ajar. Panic rose in his chest like heat from a fire pit. He rushed downstairs, boots pounding the wooden steps, scanning every face for a sign. Nothing. Then the stable boy shouted, "Mr. Eli, she's by the river." And he ran. He found her standing knee-deep in the water, eyes closed, arms crossed over her chest. The current tugged at her dress, but she didn't move. When Eli called her name, she turned slowly. "I remember this river," she said. "Not this exact one, but the way it feels. Cold. Honest. When I ran, I thought maybe I'd forget everything in water like this." Eli didn't answer. He just stepped beside her, boots soaking, and said, "Water don't erase things, but it reminds you you're still breathing." She looked up at him then, not broken but defiant. "He's coming, isn't he?" Eli nodded. "Maybe. Or maybe he's already here." She swallowed hard. "If I run again, I don't think I'll come back." Eli studied her for a moment. Then, without flinching, he said, "Then don't run. Stand." Her shoulders dropped, as if something heavy had just rolled off her spine. "Will you stand with me?" she whispered. Eli looked at the sky, then back at her, until my last step. They walked back to town together, soaked to the knees, but standing taller than they'd ever stood before. People noticed, and when they passed the black-coated rider on the porch of the general store, Clara didn't flinch. She didn't look down. The rider watched her with eyes like flint, but she never stopped walking. The silence that had once defined her had become something else now. Not fear, but power. The kind only the West could understand. And as dusk fell over the rooftops, casting long shadows across the dirt roads, the town held its breath once more. Not out of fear, but because something was about to change, not with a gunshot, but with a choice. A cowboy, a girl, and a past that had followed them both to the edge of reckoning. The following day broke with a sky painted in ash and gold, that strange stillness that blankets a town before something gives. Eli rose before dawn, saddled his horse without a word, and checked the rounds in his rifle not because he planned to use them, but because preparedness was sacred where law had limits. Downstairs, the saloon was already alive with whispers. Not music, not drink, just nervous voices threading through morning dust, all circling the same question. Would today be the day Clara's past came to collect? Clara came down the stairs wearing boots now, her chin higher than anyone had seen. She wore the same worn shawl, but over it, a band of leather tightened at her wrist, a keepsake Eli hadn't seen before. She caught him looking. "It was my sister's," she said quietly. "They never found her." Eli held her gaze. "Then let's make sure they never take you." She nodded once. Not with fear, with certainty. She had run for long enough. Now, she would root herself in the place that finally saw her not as a burden, but as a name. By mid-morning, the rider returned. Not to the sheriff, not to the hotel, but to Eli. He approached the cowboy outside the saloon, boots crunching slow on gravel, coat brushing dust behind him like a trailing thread. "She belongs to someone," he said, voice low, sharp. Eli stood, hands free, shoulders square. "She belongs to no one." The man's eyes narrowed. "You don't know who you're protecting." Eli smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I know exactly who I'm protecting, and I know you're not man enough to look her in the eye." The two men stood like statues, still as the grave, the town frozen around them. But no shots came. The rider stepped back, not in defeat, but calculation. "Then it won't be me, but someone's coming. They always do." And he turned, climbed into his saddle, and rode off without another word. Clara stepped out from the saloon doorway, just as the dust settled. "That was him," she said, voice level. "The one who watched. The one who handed me over." Eli didn't answer. He didn't need to. The lines had been drawn. That night, Eli and Clara sat by the fire in the back of the saloon yard. They didn't speak much. The logs cracked softly, and above them, stars blinked to life one by one. In the Old West, firelight wasn't just warmth, it was truth. And the truth was this: they had already won something no outlaw could take. Dignity. Solid ground. The power of standing when everything inside you said to run. And whatever tomorrow brought, they'd meet it the same way they met the silence in that saloon, shoulder to shoulder, heart to heart. The next days passed with a strange peace, the kind that doesn't last. Clara returned to small tasks around town, helping at the general store, brushing horses at the stable, offering what little she had with the same gentleness that had once been stolen from her. People watch her with new eyes now, not as a broken thing, but as someone made of iron beneath the dust. The children waved when she passed. The women left bread on her doorstep. And every night, Eli waited on the porch with a cup of coffee and a rifle he never needed to raise. But peace in the West is always temporary. On the 6th morning, 3 riders came in from the South Trail, all dressed in gray dusters, spurs ringing like warnings. They didn't speak to anyone. They didn't tie their horses. They just stared. And Clara, she felt it before anyone else. The way her shoulders tensed. The way her eyes didn't blink. These weren't strangers. These were ghosts with spines. Men who once owned her fate like a pair of dice in their palm. And now they were back to finish what they'd started. Eli stepped out into the street the moment they dismounted. The silence returned, just like that day in the saloon. No laughter, no movement, just that endless pause before something breaks. The lead rider was older now, but not weak. Eyes like stone, jaw tight with purpose. She left with blood on her hands, he said. She stole something that wasn't hers. Eli didn't flinch. She stole her name back. That's not a crime. That's a resurrection. The men spread out slightly, a subtle threat, but Eli didn't move. Behind him, the sheriff appeared, hand on his holster, unsure but present. Clara stepped forward then, slowly, until she stood beside Eli, not behind him. Her voice was quiet, but sharp. You took everything from me, and I'm still here. That means I won. The oldest rider sneered. You're not the law out here. Clara's chin lifted. No, I'm something worse to you, truth. And you can't shoot that down. They stared at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, the men turned and mounted their horses. They didn't ride out fast, just slow enough to show they weren't done. But they didn't stay. The town watched them go, breath still caught. When the dust settled again, Clara looked up at Eli, and this time, there was no tremble in her hands. It's not over, she said. Eli nodded. No, but you've already stood, and that changes everything. In the Old West, not every battle ends with bullets. Some end with the kind of silence that echoes forever. The following week brought no riders, no gunfire, no chaos. But the tension remained, coiled in the shadows like a rattler waiting for a careless step. Clara carried herself differently now, not hardened, but aware. Every glance, every sound on the wind, every set of footsteps behind her reminded her that peace in the West was always a gift, never a guarantee. Eli continued his quiet watching, not as a protector hovering over her, but as an ally walking beside her. That, in itself, was a message to the town. She didn't need saving. She just needed space to stand. One afternoon, a traveling preacher passed through, setting up in the square. He spoke of redemption, of mercy, of rising after you've been broken. Clara stood in the back, listening with arms folded. When he finished, he invited testimonies, stories of forgiveness, change, grace. People turned to her, some curious, others silently hoping she'd speak. She didn't. Instead, she walked away, head held high. Eli caught up with her near the stable. You believe any of that? He asked. Clara paused. I don't need redemption. I didn't do wrong. I survived. That's not a sin. That night, she returned to the river, not to disappear, but to remember. She stood by the water as the moon rose, watching its light bend across the surface like a ribbon. Eli stayed on the ridge above, giving her distance, but staying close enough to step in if needed. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She just knelt and whispered something into the wind, a name or a prayer, maybe both. The river carried it off in silence. When she stood, she looked taller. Not in height, in spirit. Back in town, things had changed. A few people who once kept their distance now greeted Clara with respect. She wasn't a girl covered in dirt anymore. She was a symbol, a quiet warning to those who preyed on the weak, and a living testament to what happens when someone refuses to stay broken. Clara didn't ask for attention. She just moved forward, day by day, foot by foot, rewriting her place in a world that had once erased her. And still, the riders hadn't returned. but no one believed they were gone for good. In the West, evil didn't always knock. Sometimes, it circled until you let your guard down. Clara understood that now. So did Eli. But they weren't waiting in fear. They were waiting in strength, the kind that comes not from weapons, but from walking through fire and still choosing to plant flowers in the ash. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Thursday morning, tucked into a saddlebag left on Eli's front step. No one saw who left it. No tracks. No scent of hooves on the dirt. Just a single folded page and a name written in ink that had bled from weather or time. Clara. She read it under the cottonwood near the edge of town. Her face changed as her eyes scanned the words, not with fear, but with recognition. "They're coming," she said finally. "All of them this time." The town heard about it by sundown. Some packed. Others prayed. A few offered her horses, food, passage east. But Clara refused every offer. "If I run now, I'll never stop. And I'm tired of running." Her words rippled through the people like thunder. Eli stood beside her in the square, arms crossed, silent. He didn't need to say anything. Everyone knew by now. Where she stood, he stood. And together, they made the ground shake. The sheriff, who once hesitated at her presence, now came with a rifle and a question. "Do you want to fight?" Clara looked at him with calm fire in her eyes. "No," she said. "I want to be seen. I want them to know I didn't disappear. I'm still here, and I'm not afraid." The sheriff nodded once. "Then we'll make sure they see you." That night, torches were lit around the edge of town. Not to defend, to bear witness. Clara didn't sleep. Neither did Eli. They sat together on the porch, the stars above them like 1,000 watching eyes. "You could have walked away," she said softly. Eli shook his head. "There's no peace in walking away from what's right. Not for me." She reached into her pocket and handed him something small, the tin horse the boy had once given her. "Then take this. I won't forget. And if something happens," he closed her hand gently around it again. "Nothing's going to happen. Not here. Not while we're standing." And so they waited, not just for the riders, but for the truth to arrive with them. In the West, justice rarely came clean. It came on horseback, with dust and darkness in its trail. But this time, the town wasn't blind. They had seen Clara's rise. They had heard her silence turn to strength. And when the time came, they wouldn't be watching from behind shutters. They'd be standing, too. The sun rose heavy the next morning, casting long, red shadows across the dirt roads, the kind of light that made everything feel sharper, more fragile. From the edge of the mesa, dust bloomed into the sky like smoke. Riders. More than 3. More than 10. A slow, steady wave of hooves and silence coming straight for the heart of town. Clara stood in the center of the street, shawl wrapped tight, feet planted like tree roots. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. Eli stood at her side, rifle slung, eyes calm. No commands were given. No orders spoken. Everyone simply waited. The townsfolk didn't run. Not this time. They stood on porches, behind barrels, along fences. Not with weapons, but with presence. With eyes. With knowing. The riders slowed when they entered the first row of buildings, surprised by what they saw. No fear, no hiding, no doors slammed shut. Just people watching. Watching a girl they once ignored, now standing like an iron post in the road. The lead rider dismounted. He looked older, rougher, but still dangerous. He walked slowly toward Clara and stopped 10 feet away. "You should have stayed gone," he said, voice low like gravel. "I did," Clara answered. "And I came back. That's the difference between you and me." The man's lip curled. "You cost us everything." Clara tilted her head. "No, you lost everything the day you believed I was yours to break." The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't gasp. They just stood still, holding the moment in place. In the Old West, silence could be sharper than any blade. And right now, Clara's words had cut deeper than a knife. The man's hand twitched toward his belt. But before he could finish the thought, Eli took one step forward. Just one. And the man froze. Behind him, his riders shifted uncomfortably. They hadn't expected this. They came to finish a ghost. Instead, they found a wall of living truth. No bullets had been fired. No fists thrown. But they were already losing. Not just because of Clara, but because of what she made them see in themselves. Cowards. Predators. Shadows exposed under a rising sun. After what felt like forever, the lead man looked away. He turned, mounted his horse. The others followed, confused, bitter. But no one said a word. They rode out the same way they came in, silent, beaten, and suddenly small beneath the vast, judgmental sky. And Clara just watched them go, breathing slow, like someone who had finally exhaled a weight she'd carried for too many years. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The West had already heard her. When the dust settled for the last time, the town remained frozen, not in fear, but in awe. They had witnessed something rare, something pure. A woman who had been dragged through the dirt rise without vengeance, without violence, and reclaim not just her name, but her worth. Clara turned slowly and walked back through the center of the street, past faces that now held something new. Reverence. Not pity, not curiosity, just quiet respect. Eli followed behind her, not as her guardian, but as her witness. From the saloon porch, the sheriff removed his hat. The preacher bowed his head. Even the children sensed it. Something powerful had happened here, something too sacred for shouting or celebration. Clara stepped onto the porch of her small home and paused. She looked at the tin horse resting on the windowsill, placed there earlier that morning. It shimmered in the light like it belonged there all along. Later that evening, as the town slowly returned to life, the fire behind the saloon was lit once more. People gathered not out of fear, but to share space. They brought food, stories, songs, none of them about what had happened. But all of them were because of what had happened. Clara sat with her shawl wrapped around her shoulders, Eli beside her, and for the first time in years, she let herself laugh. Not a loud laugh, just enough to say, "I'm still here, and I'm still human." No law was rewritten that day. No newspaper printed her name. But the story of the girl covered in dirt, the one who stood and made the whole town silent, that lived on. Around campfires, in the hush of twilight, in the way folks looked at strangers with a little more grace. In the West, legends didn't need bullets. They just needed truth, courage, and someone willing to rise from the ground when the world expected them to stay broken. And Clara, now a name spoken with pride, had done exactly that. In a land known for taking, she had given something back, a reminder that standing up doesn't always mean drawing a gun. Sometimes, it just means refusing to disappear. And in the end, that can echo louder than any shot ever fired. In the Old West, justice didn't always ride in with a badge or leave behind a trail of bullets. Sometimes, it came in the form of a girl covered in dirt who stood tall while the world tried to keep her down. Clara's story was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming something much deeper, the right to exist, to be seen, and to no longer live in the shadows of silence. And in choosing to stand, not just for herself but for the truth, she changed an entire town without firing a single shot. Her strength didn't come from steel or muscle, but from surviving what tried to bury her. From walking back into the very place that once turned its eyes away and daring it to look at her again. Through Eli's quiet loyalty and the town's awakening gaze, we witnessed the slow transformation of a wound into wisdom, of trauma into testament. Clara didn't just return. She returned with dignity. And that was more powerful than any weapon the West had ever known. And isn't that the lesson most forget? That sometimes the bravest act is not in the fight, but in the refusal to vanish. Clara could have disappeared, like so many others whose names history never bothered to remember. But instead, she stood, dusty, trembling, and utterly unbroken. And when she did, the world around her had no choice but to pause, listen, and change. Because that's what happens when someone refuses to carry shame that never belonged to them in the first place. Now, maybe you've never stood in the dirt with the world against you. Or maybe you have. Maybe you felt invisible, unheard, discarded. Let Clara's journey remind you. No matter what they've taken, they can't erase your truth, not unless you let them. And when you finally rise, no matter how quietly, you'll shake the ground beneath the ones who try to silence you. The West taught us that legends aren't born in noise. They're born in resistance. If this story moved you, if it echoed something deep in your chest, then stay with us. Subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories that honor the forgotten voices and the quiet strength within us all. Leave a like if Clara's courage inspired you. and share in the comments what moment struck you the most. Because sometimes your reflection might be the very thing someone else needs to stand up to.